Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to her document, Her Dignity, in conversation with LHR's Statelessness Unit. My name is Thandeka Chauke, and I have the honor of moderating today's conversation. We gather in the final week of Women's Month here in South Africa, a time that commemorates the courage of the women who marched against the apartheid pass laws in August 1956. Those laws reduced Black South Africans to perpetual suspects, forced to carry documents, not to affirm their rights or their belonging, but to control their movement and strip them of their right to be. Today, in August 2025, we meet to reflect on that very same struggle. The fight for documentation that affirms rights, that guarantees belonging, and unlocks human dignity continues. I'll start by painting the big picture and tracing the roots of statelessness in South Africa. To understand the phenomenon of statelessness in South Africa, we must go back. From the earliest days of colonial rule, systems of passes and permits were designed to exclude the Black majority from recognition and to facilitate their exploitation as cheap labor. These were not neutral bureaucratic tools. They were instruments of control. Under apartheid, this exclusion was codified and deepened. Racial classification determined whether you could move, study, marry, or own land. The pinnacle of this system was the creation of the Bantustans, or the so-called homelands. And in 1970, the Bantu Homeland Citizenship Act stripped millions of Black South Africans of their citizenship, rendering them statutory foreigners in the land of their birth. That act of state-engineered dispossession left entire generations legally alienated, with Black women and children at the bottom of this hierarchy. With the dawn of democracy, the interim constitution restored citizenship to those whose nationality had been stolen. The 1996 constitution went further, enshrining in Section 20 that no citizen may be deprived of citizenship. And in Section 28(1), that every child has the right to a name and a nationality from birth. And of course, in principle, this was revolutionary, a decisive break with the past. And yet 3 decades into democracy, the promise remains unfulfilled for many. As our own constitutional court acknowledged in Chususe, citizenship in South Africa has always been a fraught tool, once used to exclude and now still inconsistently applied. And today, bureaucratic hurdles, administrative violence, and discriminatory practices continue to leave thousands without recognition. This unfinished business of democracy is what we see through the phenomenon of statelessness and access to documentation in South Africa today. It is the grandmother who never had her birth recorded because apartheid deliberately excluded her, and now finds herself unable to prove she is South African. It is the teenager blocked from writing matric exams because her father's ID is under investigation. It is the child born in Johannesburg who cannot access a birth certificate because their mother is undocumented. These are not isolated glitches. They are the living legacy of laws and systems that have been built to deny Black South Africans recognition, dignity, and belonging. And as the Constitutional Court put it in Mahlangu, Black women in particular carry a triple yoke of oppression: race, gender, and class. Statelessness is one of the many contemporary faces of that oppression. Now, why does documentation matter? Why does the right to nationality or citizenship matters? And Hannah Arendt reminds us in very simple terms that the right to citizenship is the right to have rights. And without recognition by a state, all other rights become fragile. Documentation is not just a piece of paper. It is the key to education, to healthcare, to work, to passing on inheritance, to voting. It is the difference between visibility and invisibility. It strikes to the core of a person's human dignity. And so when documentation is denied, we must also remember that it's not gender neutral. Women, especially Black marginalized women in South Africa, often find themselves responsible for navigating the bureaucracy, not only for themselves, but often for their children too, and even their grandchildren. And when they're excluded, their children inherit that exclusion. And this is why our Document a Dignity campaign emphasizes that statelessness is both gendered and generational. This is why in 2011, the Statelessness Unit at Lawyers for Human Rights was created. For 15 years, our unit has walked with people whose dignity was denied, fought cases that have changed the law, and carried forward the demand that no child should be stateless. Today, as we close Women's Month, we want to reflect on this journey, past, present, and future. We will hear about the gendered reality of statelessness, the human cost, and finally, the call to action. What all of us can do as lawyers, as citizens, as allies, as activists, to finish the work of turning the constitutional promise of equal citizenship into reality. But before we move into those discussions, and before I introduce my esteemed panel of speakers, we want to ground ourselves in the voices of the women themselves. As part of our Her Document a Dignity campaign, we asked women living without documents directly impacted by statelessness a simple but profound question. If I had a document today, I invite you now to watch this short film and listen with your hearts and hold their words as we continue this conversation. If anything strikes you, I would also encourage you and invite you to share a Purple Heart in solidarity in the chat box. Thank you.
If I had the documents today, I will be a soldier. If I had the documents today, my other daughter will be in school. If I had a document today, my younger daughter will be able to apply for an ID. If I had a document today, I will get married to my girlfriend. If I had the documents today, I will work to buy a house. If I had the documents today, I will work know my roots.
If I had a document, my mom might still be alive. If I had a document today, I will be a social worker. If I had a document today, I would have a will and a funeral plan. If I had a document today, I could apply for a school fee exemption for my daughter. If I had a document today, I would have a bank account. If I had a document today, I would walk freely wherever I want.
If I had a document today, I would have an identity. If I had a document today, I would not fear arrest whenever I move around. If I had a document today, I would study events coordination. If I had a document today, I would hold a matriculation certificate. If I had a document today, I would work in events management. If I had a document today, I would feel at peace. If I had a document today, I wouldn't feel trapped in the city.
If they had a document today, I would provide for them. If they had document today, I wouldn't worry about them going to school. And if they had a document today, I wouldn't worry about their future. If they had a document today, I would feel like they exist. If they had a document today, I will know my family will grow.
If I had a document today, I would be a software engineer. If I had a document today, I would travel and go to places I can only dream of. If I had a document today, I'd be able to think about getting married and having children. If I had a document today, I would go to the clinic. If I had a document today, I would go to the library and post office. If I had a document today, I would have my own house with my own things.
Thank you for holding those voices with us. What you've heard and seen captures so clearly how documentation, or the absence of it, shapes women's lives in South Africa. To take us deeper into that, I would now like to invite Palesa Maloisane. Palesa will speak to the gendered reality of statelessness in South Africa and how women and girls encounter unique barriers in accessing nationality, and why our Her Document Her Dignity campaign places their stories at the center. Palesa, over to you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. As Thandeka has indicated, sorry, let me just turn on my video. There we go. As Thandeka indicated, my name is Palesa Maloisane. I have been an attorney in the Statelessness Unit for the past 2 or so years, and I feel immensely privileged to be part of this 15-year history of women that have really shaped and taken this project forward in eradicating this really perverse, difficult issue that leaves a lot of people that are affected in a very undignified position and facing a life of exclusion. Over the past year or so, though, we've been trying to tackle or look at statelessness, not necessarily in the broad sense that we have been working on historically, but really zoning in and creating this narrower lens into what the unequal experience of statelessness is in South Africa, because the practical reality of it is that it is an issue that is experienced unequally. And so we wanted to zone in and create a specific focus in our work on the gender dimensions of this issue and how statelessness disproportionately affects women. We know that South Africa has some of the most progressive legal frameworks that we could have in accessing human rights responsibilities and obligations, particularly for nationality. But what we see consistently is these implementation challenges that we have, as well as social inequalities that really expose women, particularly undocumented women and those that are migrants as well, to an increased risk of statelessness. Now, statelessness essentially refers to the condition where an individual isn't recognized as a citizen by any country. And so you can imagine how this denial then allows them to not access fundamental rights, that being education, healthcare, employment, and most importantly, legal protection. And we have the legal frameworks, right? We have the Citizenship Act that really provides the framework around citizenship, whether it's by birthright or by descent-based. And we have a protection within Section 2.2 for stateless persons. But again, because of the bureaucratic sort of inefficiencies that we see that leads to implementation gaps, this lack of documentation that women and affected individuals face often leads them to de facto statelessness, essentially. And so I want to look mainly at some of the key drivers, right? What are these key drivers that lead to this disproportionate impact on women and children? Because they face these very gender-specific barriers in acquiring legal status for themselves and their children. And what we've seen through our casework over the years is, I would say, three main issues. Firstly, very patriarchal sort of legal interpretations of our law, right, that are there. That can also lead to very discriminatory documentation practices. And we see this through our competent authority, being the Department of Home Affairs. But one that is very sensitive, and I think particularly working within the climate that we are at and that women face, is this dependence that it creates for women that are stateless. The dependence on their male partners, particularly for their survival and support as they try and navigate this legal identity process in South Africa. And so a lot of women, and particularly migrant women, who may give birth in South Africa, but are then unable to register births because of their own legal status, are more likely to face poverty and violence and a lot of health risks because they can't access healthcare. If we bring in another sort of intersectional lens, right, and look at migrant women, if a woman would be fleeing conflict or any sort of persecution and comes to South Africa and happens to give birth here, she wouldn't be able to register her child without paperwork. And so that child then runs the risk of growing up without any legal identity or rights. So again, while our laws do allow for both men and women to confer nationality to their children, these bureaucratic sort of obstacles that we see in its practical sort of implementation, and these ad hoc requirements sometimes that are brought forward, you know, proof of paternity or even just legal presence that they're required to give, constantly and consistently disproportionately affects women in this issue. And so I think if we zone in on the gendered impact, there's four sort of main categories that I would look at. And that firstly being the barriers to birth registration that a lot of women face, right? Someone that is a single mother or a woman that would be abandoned by her partner sometimes often can't register her children because of the father's absence or her lack of identity documents. And it's not necessarily because it's a legal requirement or anything like that. The Department of Home Affairs can often demand the father's documentation. And because of this sort of patriarchal, misogynistic look on our law, where we need to trace a lineage through the patrilineal line, exacerbates the risk of statelessness for a lot of women or children of single mothers. Again, the dependency and the violence that is intricately linked to this issue, because women who find themselves in abusive or coercive relationships are often not able to secure documentation because of the dependence that they have on their male partners. So they're at a greater risk of gender-based violence or trafficking and exploitation. And they often have limited access as well to legal recourse or any other sort of protective mechanism. If we look at reproductive or maternal health care, stateless women aren't able to access public healthcare services, right? And that includes maternal health. And so you can imagine the intergenerational effect that this has and how it perpetuates this cycle of statelessness and poverty. And then finally, just looking at their own livelihood and the education, right? They aren't able to, or rather they face restrictions in employment. And so they're forced to resort to informal or very exploitative labor, and their children being excluded from schooling. So it worsens, I would say, the gendered poverty aspect of this issue. So statelessness in South Africa essentially isn't a uniform experience, I would say. It's very deeply shaped by gender, someone's migration status, and is fixed with socioeconomic marginalization as well. Because women face the systemic and intersectional barriers that they have that heighten their risk of statelessness and their ability really to secure rights for their children. So I believe that in addressing this issue, it's not just about legal or policy reform, but I think we need to incorporate gender-sensitive implementation within this. And that means, you know, the accessibility that we have in documentation processes in creating more intentional, stronger protections for vulnerable women and populations. Because without citizenship, women and children will continue to be left in a legal limbo. So ensuring gender equitable access to a legal identity is incredibly crucial and critical for justice and inclusion. So the purpose, I think, and if we move into the campaign and some of the very key messages that we've tried to frame the Her Document and Her Dignity campaign around, is that statelessness isn't just a legal issue, right? It has a very profound emotional and psychological impact, which you've seen, and it's been illustrated in the stories of the women that have come forward and that we've been able to document. Because I think it manifests a very deep personal or showcases the personal and systemic challenges that are faced by stateless individuals. And particularly, it's significant within women because of the intergenerational and intersectional nature that it has and how it exacerbates the vulnerabilities of these affected individuals. And so what we want to drive home is that this is an issue that statelessness is resolvable, right? If we have enough political will and enough actors engaging with the issue. And if we have these urgent policy changes that can address and mitigate it. And so finally, I just want to drive home how I think all the importance of this campaign and how it can help is just in, firstly, raising public awareness, right? I think many South Africans and any other affected community is sometimes unaware of what statelessness is, right? Or how it happens. And so my hope is that through this campaign, we can really humanize this issue, because I think we speak a lot on the theory and everything that's involved, but by sharing a lot of the real life stories of stateless women and children, we can put a face or a lived experience behind this really difficult issue. We can also in turn educate a lot of the affected communities and inform them about the correct birth registration procedures, what their legal rights are under our South African and also international law. And in turn, we can challenge a lot of the sort of gender discrimination that we see. I think our advocacy in the campaign can really spotlight some of the gender biased practices that we see at the Department of Home Affairs, whether it's, you know, demanding a father's documentation. And we can push for a lot of gender sensitive training for civil servants and a lot of the frontline staff that affected persons have to deal with as they try attain documentation. And so finally, and probably the most important and part of the purpose of this webinar is that it can lead to coalition building, right? I think we should mobilize the networks that we have, whether it's through civil society organizations, inviting a lot of private actors and private firms to take on some of these cases, and share the resources that we have, share the information that's available to us to really strengthen our movement in eradicating this issue and continue to just sustain pressure on a lot of policymakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. I think you've really helped us to see that statelessness isn't just a human rights violation, but it's more layers of violations that women then face on an individual level, on the level of their own families, but also on the societal level. To bring that down to the ground, I would now like to invite Deborah Sibona. Deborah has been working with the LHR Statelessness Unit from April of this year in the law clinic, assisting families affected by statelessness. And I want her to share her reflections from her time within the clinic around the human cost, the lived experiences that Palesa mentions, but also the heartbreak, the resilience of people denied documentation. Deborah, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Thandeka. Hi, everyone. I would like to talk more about, I would be talking more about the stories of the people, specifically some of the clients that we've assisted. There's a family that we have been assisting. There's a lot of clients, but I want to zone in on just one family, just to show this impact that statelessness has on individual families. This one family that we have is a Mokoena family. The grandmother in this family was born in Jabavu, Soweto, and she was born. She's currently 65 years old, and she's got 4 daughters. The grandmother was never registered. Her birth was never registered, and as a result, her 4 children, when as births were also not registered because she's also unregistered. Her mother was a single parent, and she passed away in 1976. She then went on to have 4 children. Out of the 4 children that she has, 2 of them managed to get documentation through school, and two of those daughters didn't manage to get any documentation from help to get documentation from school. The 2 daughters that don't have documentation now have children, which as a result are also not documented. So that also speaks to the generational impact that we have been talking about. As a result, this family, the grandmother in this family, is unable to get a social grant. She has never been able to get an opportunity to vote in a democratic South Africa. The children have not been able to secure stable jobs, just informal employment. As a result, the grandchildren at this stage are also were able to get into school, but will also were able to get into school, but will not also be able to get formal employment and explore tertiary education. But through our help, we're able to help them. We're in the process of helping them to secure those documents, but there's been a lot of challenges in terms of the Home Affairs demanding DNA testing to prove that the families are, they are related and they're from South Africa. Yes, they do have proof that they were born here and all of that, but at the moment, because they still don't have documents, it's still a challenge to them at school, even sometimes to participate in extramural activities, because when you are doing soccer or whatever, they need your birth certificate to be able for you to be able to participate in school competitions and all those things. And without birth certificates, that's impossible to do. So those are the challenges that these children have. And I'm hopeful that we'll be able to assist them but we need more people, we need more lawyers to assist such families so that no child will not be able to not go to school because they don't have documents. Yes, the law says, and there's a policy that says that the department must not turn away children because they lack documentation, but some schools still do not accept these children into their schools because they don't have documentation. So with the help of you, we will be able to help more families so that these children actually get their education and also be able to pursue their dreams. I know, and some of them, the clients that I've consulted with, someone wants to be a soldier and they cannot do that if they don't have an ID. Someone wants to go to tertiary and study further, they cannot do that without an ID. But I believe that if we work together and help each child at a time, we will be able to make their dreams come true and help them to be able to be productive members of society. That's for them to also participate in our economy and have a better life for them and for the future generations. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Deborah. I just want to underscore that the stories shared in the Her Document, Her Dignity campaign, as well as this one story that Deborah has shared, are only 6 stories out of hundreds that we see at Lawyers for Human Rights. On the other side of that is the fact that the 3 attorneys you see on this call are the entirety of what is the Statelessness Unit, assisting everyone who needs help in South Africa. And so that call for pro bono support is something really important to us. And thank you to Vanessa for posting a link in the chat box for those who are private legal practitioners who want to volunteer their time to take up cases, or even those who are interested in capacity building so that we can assist you and pass on some of this knowledge. We've looked at the big picture, we've heard the gendered reality, and we felt the human cost. Now we must ask, what do we do with this knowledge? For that, I'm turning to our attorney in Durban, Sihle Nyangiwe. Sihle will close our main discussion with the call to action, sharing what the Statelessness Unit at LHR has achieved over these 15 years, and how civil society, private lawyers, and allies can join this fight to end statelessness. Sihle, please go ahead.
Thank you, Thandeka. Thank you so much for your great moderating, and I greet the rest of the attendees online. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. Yes, it's actually afternoon, it's after 12 o'clock. So, excuse me, I've been asked to bring the conversation home with a clear call to action. But however, before I zone in on the clear call to action, what we can do as civil society, legal practitioners and activists in this particular space, I also want to take a moment to just really pause and showcase some of the work that our unit has been able to achieve, not individually as ourselves, but also in collaboration with other partners in the space and with other networks as well. So at LHR, we've always believed that to be able to tackle the magnitude and the complexity of this problem of statelessness, we've always need to employ a multi-pronged approach, including litigation, strategic litigation to be specific, including advocacy, as well as partnership and community mobilization. So in each of these particular strands, I'm going to detail then some of the work that we have been able to achieve over the past 15 years. And like I said, not only as a unit at LHR, but more so in collaboration with the many partners that are present here today. So on the strand of litigation, so for more than a decade, we have been at the forefront of strategic litigation. And really the aim behind strategic litigation is to be able to achieve not only the individual relief for the litigant or the client, but also use the law, to develop the law rather, to be able to achieve greater good, not only for that particular person affected by the direct litigation, but most importantly, to help thousands of other people may be similarly placed, but may not have access to legal representation or access to justice through the courts. Of course, it's been a number of cases that we have engaged in, either as applicants or respondents or as amicus, or in any other capacity. But I want to highlight just two specific ones because I think those really illustrate the impact the unit has had over the past 15 years or so. And so the first case I want to pause and highlight on is the DGLR case versus Minister of Home Affairs. This is a case that we launched back in 2014 in the High Court in Gauteng, excuse me, and then finalized in the year 2016 by the Supreme Court of Appeal in Bloemfontein. So really the facts of this matter was a young child born of Cuban parents, but born in South Africa. At the time of her birth, her parents, though Cuban citizens, but could not then confer their nationality to DJLR, the girl or the child in this particular matter, because of a technicality in the Cuban law that indicated that for Cuban parents who exit or who leave the country in excess of 10 years, would then no longer be able to pass on their nationality to their children. And so DJLR was born in such a predicament, born in South Africa, but born to Cuban parents, unable, because of the technical reading of the law, to pass on their nationality to her. So it practically meant then that DJLR was actually stateless, but born in South Africa nonetheless. So what we then did with this particular matter, we then consolidated the legislation that we had at the time, which we still do, but particularly the Citizenship Act that provides a safeguard to childhood statelessness, particularly Section 2.2, that says that if a person is born in the Republic of South Africa, but then they would otherwise be stateless, so they can't secure citizenship anywhere else in any other country or jurisdiction, but they are born in South Africa and the birth has been registered, then that person must be recognized as a citizen by birth. And that kind of recognition must take place automatically through the operation of law. So the Department of Home Affairs doesn't have a role to determine or to have a discretion if they want to grant it to you or not. Automatically, as soon as those requirements are met, right, birth in the Republic, otherwise stateless, birth is registered, then there should then is a duty in the department to confer citizenship on such a person. And so we went to court arguing that very same thing, and luckily the court agreed with us. The Department of Home Affairs did try to appeal the decision, but failed to because they couldn't get their papers together in time. And so finally, the matter being settled in our favor back in 2016, ruled that DJLR had to be recognized as a citizen by birth and had to be recognized, and also then her particulars having to be entered in the National Population Registry. Now, what is important and seminal about this particular case is not because we're able to secure recognition for DJLR, but most importantly, the court then ordered the Department of Home Affairs to promulgate regulations that make it possible for other similarly placed individuals who were born in South Africa but unable to secure citizenship anywhere else to be able to make use of that particular provision in the law to be able to affirm their right to citizenship. Of course, in true Home Affairs style, they haven't promulgated those regulations, but at least what we're able to do is to be able to then secure accountability on the part of the Department of Home Affairs, and also to set a clear precedent for recognition of persons who are born in the Republic but unable to obtain citizenship anywhere else. And I'm also happy to announce that recently we have also been able to get confirmation that DJL has indeed been recognized as a citizen and also has been given the requisite documentation to be able to affirm that recognition. The second case I want to pause and reflect on is, of course, the infamous Naki case, which then went all the way to the Corn Court, the Apex Court, and in which the Center for Child Law also intervened in, represented by Lawyers for Human Rights. And so the crux of this matter really dealt with removing barriers to birth registration, because it had dawned on us that a lack of birth registration then has a direct link on statelessness, or people then falling in between the cracks or ultimately then becoming stateless later on, although of course birth registration in itself or alone does not confer citizenship, but we're able to then pick up on that direct link between birth registration and that being an easy reality and prevention and reduction of statelessness. And so, excuse me, in the Naki case, Minzile Naki was a gentleman who was on a peacekeeping mission in the Congo, but was a citizen himself. He met the love of his wife in Congo, and they were married by way of customary marriage. And then when they returned back to the Republic of South Africa, they wanted to register the birth of their children or their child. However, at the time of the birth, his wife, being a Congolese citizen, had an expired visitor's visa. And so when she went to the Department of Home Affairs to try and register the birth of her child, she was told that she needs to firstly, regularize her stay in the Republic, and only then would she be allowed to then proceed with birth registration. Now, of course, at the time of the children's birth, they were very young, and so it's very difficult logistically to be able to facilitate a return back to the Congo, etc. And so we argued then that the father is a citizen and the father is documented and the father is eligible to be able to proceed with birth registration. Why don't you remove the barriers or the technicalities that exist either in law or in practice that prevent fathers who were either unmarried or in long-term partnerships with this woman? Why can't they also be allowed to be able to come forward and be able to, bring notice of birth and then ultimately access birth registration in the absence of the mother, right? Which is something completely impossible if the mother is either stateless herself or has an irregular immigration status, or is a failed asylum seeker, is not able to access other durable solution like resettlement or repatriation, or maybe has abandoned the child, or maybe the mother is deceased or has died, right? So in those scenarios, then it will be typically impossible for the child to be able to access birth registration, have a name, have a nationality, and ultimately enjoy all the other rights that flow from having a nationality and having a legal status. And so the Grahamstown division of the High Court in the Eastern Cape agreed with us. In fact, the court went on further to say the regulations of the Act that provide that certain documents must first be submitted before a birth can be registered. That list of document isn't rigid and should not in any way bar birth registration if either parent is not able to, provide those documents to be able to facilitate birth registration. But when the court went on to the full bench and ultimately to the Corn Court, there was a development in the laws, particularly Section 9 and 10 of the Births and the Deaths Act, which removed the technical barrier that previously then barred fathers, particularly from coming to register births of their children in the absence of the mother or without the mother's consent. Of course, in practice, this very day, we still see very practical difficulties in terms of implementing, right, the precedent set in NACI, but we've also been happy to also note a few success cases and also ultimately culminating in the issuance of a circular that regulates the registration of birth by unmarried fathers in the absence of mothers as well. And so even though they're just two cases out of a whole litany of other cases, but I think they really do illustrate the essence of our litigation, and that winning cases isn't really the ultimate goal, but really to push the law to be sensitive towards gender realities, but also towards inclusion and fairness as well. Then let me move on to the other strands of our work, which is advocacy. So we understand that litigation is great and it's important, but we understand that it's costly, it's time consuming, and also has limits as well, because Home Affairs is also very infamous for either disregarding court judgments or failing to implement them timelessly, which would then result in, endless contempt applications, which will also then not be, eventually acted upon or enforced. And so recognizing the limitations of a litigation, we also have very strong advocacy heritage, if I may. And really the aim is to be able to capture the invisible pain of being undocumented or stateless. And through these advocacy campaigns, the aim has been to humanize the law and to make sure that decision makers and public duty bearers then understand and hear the human voices of the people that are impacted by these gaps and these barriers. So let me also just highlight a few. There's been, of course, a number of them, but in the interest of time, I don't want the moderator to be angry with me. I'm just going to mention just a few. So the first is hashtag breaking borders and binaries. This is a campaign that we did in partnership with Gender Dynamics. And really the campaign was designed to challenge the rigid categories of belonging and to highlight the ways in which nationality laws and administrative practices exclude different categories of people, particularly people who belong to the LGBTQI community or transgender people or migrant women or even stateless persons as well. And then, of course, we have the hashtag unblock my ID, unblock my life campaign, which is a campaign that we ran alongside the blocked ID litigation, also known as the Mazibuko case. And really the idea there was to amplify the stories of the people whose lives were quite literally frozen because their IDs had been arbitrarily blocked by the Department of Home Affairs, showing not only the legal, arguments, but also the human impact of having your ID actually blocked. So it was in the form of a letter that the participants addressed to the Minister of Home Affairs. Then the incumbent was Minister Motsoaledi, just really telling him what the impact has been on their lives, having to effectively live as a stateless person in the country of their birth and being denied the right to belong in the country of their ancestors, really. And so these campaigns don't just complement litigation, but they also create the public and the political pressure that we need to be able to make implementation more rigid and more real. And of course, how can you forget our current campaign, Her Document and Her Dignity, which is, of course, raising awareness about how statelessness and documentation specifically have intergenerational and gendered consequences. For women in particular, lack of documents affects not only access, but ultimately dignity in this country that is supposed to shelter and protect us as its flowers. And then the last thread that I want to touch a bit on is, excuse me, partnerships or community building or mobilization, however you want to call it. I want to talk about the partnerships that we hope to forge this particular webinar, but also to take the opportunity to be able to extend our gratitude to the partnerships that we've been able to forge over the past 15 years and that have been really instrumental in helping us to be able to achieve this particular change that we've been able to achieve, but also continue to make it possible for us to be able to do the work that we do in the spaces in which we do the work in. So we rely heavily on collaborations with other actors in the space to bring in their expertise, their resources, as well as their networks. And so a few of these examples would include the partnership that we have with HSF or the Herbert Smith Free Wills partnership. And they've been really great in helping us administer our citizenship application from the gathering of the documentation stage to the application stage, and really facilitating any kinds of engagement or correspondence that may be shared between the applicant and the Department of Home Affairs. So we will not be able to help, the hundreds and the hundreds of clients, I think over 300 clients, if it was not for the partnership that we've been able to forge with HSF in Johannesburg. And they are being able to tenaciously assist all our clients that flock in wanting to access citizenship. The second partnership I want to zone in is, of course, Bowman's, who's also through whom we've been also able to host this particular webinar. So they've been able to step in a number of ways, but most, crucially, been helping us with legal representation, particularly in the blocked ID case or in the Mazibuko case. And I've also been taking many other cases that would not be able to either, bring forward or, lay before the hands of the court. It was not through their support in terms of legal, expertise, but also financial assistance as well. And of course, our most recent partnership with LNP. So those are my people. I hope that they're also here on the floor. So they've been really great. And I think we've been able to identify a few of the cases that we'll also be able to take forward with them. And we hope that our collective partnership will also be able to produce tangible results going forward, not only for this particular, period, but going forward as well. And so let me then conclude with the clear call to action. or the appeal that we are making. This is exactly where you come in. So having shared some of the work that we've been able to achieve, let me end with this invitation or this clear call to action. So to our civil society colleagues and to our civil society friends, we ask that you are able to collaborate with us if you can and help us amplify the issue in your own advocacy circles. Statelessness remains a hidden problem, but unless we bring it to the fore and unless we make noise about it, it will forever remain a hidden problem. To our private lawyers or private colleagues who are also joining us on the panel, please consider taking on more pro bono cases or sign up to our legal support network. You will see the link in the chat box, and I think Valisa has also shared that. And so even though stateless cases can be somewhat complex and maybe nuanced and new, but your expertise can literally change the course of someone else's life. And LHR will remain available to offer technical support and also capacity building to be able to strengthen our legal networks. And of course, to donors and to members of the public, we need your support in a very practical manner and in a very urgent manner. My apologies as well. And so one of those is our current DNA test fundraising drive. So DNA testing, as you know, remains a necessary evil in citizenship and also in birth registration cases. And the families that we assist and the clients that we do assist are mostly indigent families coming from poor and marginalized background. And so because of this barrier that they faced with in accessing documentation of birth registration, the cost then simply becomes unaffordable for many and for most of them. So we'll also share the link and animated videos in the chat box where you can also be able to contribute if you may and assist a family or a child to be able to register their birth, have a name, and ultimately have a right to belong in this country. So in closing, in conclusion on my call of action, litigation, advocacy, and partnership have brought us this far, but we can actually go further if civil society and the legal profession as a whole, private and public, and the general public can be able to walk the journey with us. So together we're able to, chip away the systems that keep people stateless or undocumented or outside on the periphery or outside on the margins. And together we're able to restore the dignity of Black women, but ultimately the dignity of all the people that call this country home. Thank you, Tandega.
Thank you so much, Sihle. So those are three very clear calls to action, and you have put the challenge to our audience. Please feel free to also share the links that Palesa has posted in the chat box to our Global Giving campaign, our fundraiser for DNA testing for children who can't afford DNA tests so that they can get their birth certificates, as well as the form that we are circulating to any lawyers in your networks that might be interested in either learning more about statelessness or even taking up one of the hundreds of cases that are still sitting with Palesa, Deborah, and Sihle. And now we will open up the floor to our audience. I have enabled everyone's microphone. So you can put up your hand or you can simply unmic so that you can join the conversation. We'd really love to hear from you, whether it's a comment or a question. Does anyone want to take the floor?
Hi, Tandega.
Hello.
Are you here?
Yes.
Hi, it's Nelsie Sboza. I'm a practicing advocate at Group 1 at the Joburg Bar. I just want to thank you and to everyone involved for providing a very important conversation on statelessness. I just popped a message on the chat to say that during my time at Worksman's, I did quite a bit of stateless work in the Deep Sloot pro bono office that Worksman's housed. I'm not sure if they still do. I think it would be a fantastic thing or idea for us to collaborate in future by taking on pro bono work and even facilitating workshops. I know Naledi Mutsiri personally, and I'm happy to discuss further. I just need to pop off. I'm actually en route back to Gauteng. I was spending a bit of time in my home province of Mpumalanga, the land of the rising sun. And please forgive me for not putting on my camera. I have a a sporty odd, and I don't want to I don't want to embarrass myself, but I've left my email address in the chat. Happy to chat further. And thank you again.
Thank you so much, Nancy. It was lovely to hear your voice, and thank you for joining us, and safe travels. We will be following up. Thanks for sharing your contact information. I think that's definitely an opportunity that we can explore further. Wilhelmina, go ahead. I'd also like to invite Palesa, Deborah, Sihle to just have your cameras on for the question and answer segment. And anyone else who wants to put on their camera, please go ahead. Wilhelmina, please go ahead.
Afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Thandeka, for this opportunity. I have a question. It's related to me. I married somebody with a South African citizenship in 2008, who's a Zambian. We registered our marriage at the Home Affairs. We got our marriage certificate, and with our first son in 2011, and he got his birth certificate. But one day when he went to the Home Affairs, he found that his ID was blocked. And since then, it's been a struggle. I had an accompanied by spouse permit, which I had for almost 5 years or 6. But since then, my other 2 sons couldn't have their birth certificates. And yeah, we wrote an email to the minister last year as his directive, but up to now, we're still on that race. So I don't know if there is hope for us or any help. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your personal story. And we're very sorry to hear about the struggles that you're going through. I'm just going to ask Palesa to speak a bit around the issue of ID blocking and the interventions that LHR is currently engaged in to try and find resolution for people. But I think stories like these are exactly why we are making this call for increased access to justice for people who are going through these issues, simply because we have been unable to handle the volumes of these cases. LHR itself had about 150 blocked ID clients. And as far as we know, through the ongoing litigation that Palesa will share more about, is that there are at least 700,000 IDs in South Africa that still remain blocked. So yes, really, over to you, Palesa.
Yeah, the issue of ID blocking has been a very critical component, I would say, of our project over the past, I would say 2 to 3 years, but we've assisted a whole host or seen a whole host of clients that are similarly situated to you or in the same position. We did successfully get an order last January, where the Pretoria High Court had found the Department of Home Affairs' administrative, practice of ID blocking to be unconstitutional, because, as I can imagine, your husband hadn't gotten any opportunity to really put forward his own representations or get some sort of explanation as to why his ID was blocked. And again, you have the lived experience, and that we're speaking about, just the continuous block in continuing your own life, right? Particularly those for children, for your children. And I think it's also a good illustration into how a lot of this issue itself is a bureaucratic issue, right? Or obstacle that a lot of people have, and that leads to de facto statelessness. And so we'd gotten an order last January denouncing this practice by the Department of Home Affairs, and where the department was ordered within 90 days to address the 137 clients that we put forward as having blocked IDs and to unblock their IDs. But I think a critical component of the order is that all children that were affected by this issue should also be registered and assisted, and they shouldn't be affected by the issue, essentially. With the external, or looking at it in a more broader sense, the department was also given 12 months to address the issue. And so since January, we've been continuously monitoring the situation, not only with our clients and in verifying that situation, but also looking at it from a macro sort of level. The unfortunate position that I think our clinic or project has been in is that as much as we would love to, take on each individual case itself, I think it also illustrates the importance of strategic litigation in sort of looking at the root or digging the issue up from the root and in addressing the systemic issue. And so we've been hoping that our order that we got in January is what will fully address the issue for, as Thandeka had mentioned, the 700,000 people that are affected by the issue. But again, I think when it comes to the purpose of this webinar, it's again a call to any legal practitioner that is here. If you could take on these individual cases, we'd welcome that, just because we at a sort of capacity constraint. But looking at how the case can sort of work in your favor, while they were given 12 months, right, to investigate everyone's blocked ID status, unfortunately, this January, the department had requested for an extension of the initial 12-month period that they had gotten they'd request for a 24-month extension, giving the department rather 2 years up until, I think, February 2027. My maths is correct, to investigate and secure court orders to have the blocks remain on affected individuals. And we did attempt to contest this and appear at the Supreme Court of Appeal, but unfortunately our appeal was dismissed very, very recently. So we're trying to frame and see if we can bring a contempt application for our clients whose IDs are blocked. However, I think I would be interested, and I would encourage you to also try see what mechanisms are available. I think the best option is to do some sort of consultation. At this stage, we might not be able to take the individual application on, but we're always here and available for legal advice and assistance, or to at least even just guide you on the way forward and to see what other partner organizations can be brought in to assist you. But that's just a snapshot look at what the situation is right now, and I'd be happy to engage with you further just to advise you.
Thank you so much, Philomena. And I'll just add that if there are any attorneys who are interested in seeing how we can jointly support Philomena, please do contact us offline. I've shared Palesa's email in the chat box. Jackie, over to you.
Thanks, Thandeka, Palesa, and everybody else who's been responsible for this webinar. And thank you for inviting us. I think it's really been very informative and wonderful that you're bringing everybody together. I just wanted to I think, build on what Nelsie Siboza was saying, and the suggestion, I think, that possibly Lawyers for Human Rights thinks about trying to tailor some specific training for those in the private legal profession who are interested in getting involved in this work. I know we obviously been working with you quite closely, specifically in relation to Section 4.3, Elgene and I, and we're doing a lot of that work. We've also been involved in some of the sort of the broad training, but I think what would be really useful would be perhaps some tailored training sessions, perhaps in collaboration with, a few firms who might be interested, the Bar Council, even the Law Society, etc. A training that could really, become a real basis for equipping people in the private profession to be taking on these kinds of cases. I know that a start has certainly been made, but I think it's just about awareness, about people understanding what the issues are and having the skill sets to actually take on matters. And I think that might be a really useful practical step going forward. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Jackie. I think that's also a very concrete, great idea that we can take forward from this webinar. Liesel echoes that. She says, love this idea, Jackie. I also see Liesel very active in the chat box. Would you like to unmute and share one of the questions that you had earlier, Liesel?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm just thinking about the longer term plans in terms of advocacy. At the moment, of course, we can do what LHR has been doing and what some of the other people on the call has been doing in terms of helping individuals prove their citizenship and getting an order through court. But that just kind of feels very unsustainable. And I wonder if we must advocate for some kind of process at Home Affairs. I mean, of course, the ideal would be if Home Affairs had a process by which you can apply for recognition of citizenship when you can't comply with all the regulations. That would be ideal. The other thing that we've been doing, all of us together, is kind of bringing cases to court that find different sections of the Birth Regulations Act unconstitutional. But I mean, I don't think Home Affairs is going to want to let go of all requirements. So it seems to me that the next step is for them to have an exceptional process for difficult cases. So I just want to hear what you think of that. And then I wanted to say I was at a Women in Law event earlier in the month for Center for Child Law. And the women there were so excited to help other women. And there are various of these women in law WhatsApp groups and whatever. So if we do seek help from women in law, I think it's going to be exciting. And if you help women, everybody else is fine.
I agree with that, Liesel. It's lovely to hear your voice, and thank you for joining us. And I will just reiterate our call for those who are interested in signing up for really a continued conversation around strategizing and just revisiting what we've done in the past 15 years and what we can still do moving forward that might be more effective. Please do sign up to the Google form so that we have your contact details and can reach out. I do see this being an ongoing conversation, and at some point maybe even being able to host an in-person roundtable. Do we have any more questions just before we wrap up our question and answer? Okay, wonderful. Thank you everyone who has contributed to the discussion. And it brings us to the close. And before we actually close, we wanted to have a special segment where we take a moment to honor the women who have built and led the Statelessness Unit since its founding in 2011. This unit has always been women-led, and today it continues because of their vision and labor. We asked former leaders of this work to share reflections and messages to the current team. Their words, as you'll see, are a tribute across time, reminding us where we come from and why we carry this work forward. So I'll start with Kajal. Kajal was the brains of the Statelessness Unit, you can put it that way. And as she mentions, I was the manager of the Refugee and Migrant Rights Program for many years. And in 2010, with the support of the then National Director, Jacob van Garderen, we developed the idea for a dedicated Statelessness Unit at LHR. It launched in 2011 with funding from UNHCR, and the first staff members of the unit were Rosalind and Jessica. The unit quickly became the leading organization in South Africa, challenging statelessness and finding solutions for individuals. And Kajal's message to today's Statelessness Unit is that birth registration and access to an identity document is the key that assists people in accessing a multitude of other rights. This work may seem quiet compared to big wins and constitutional cases, but it is the work that changes lives most profoundly. Jessica joined the Statelessness Unit in 2011. And she says, when we launched the Statelessness Project, we were working in uncharted legal territory. I remember feeling very lonely and overwhelmed by the weight of what often seems like an impossible problem. I am proud that we developed the first practitioner's guide and delivered trainings that helped others take on this work. I'll never forget my amazing clients and their families, mothers fighting for their children's futures, elderly people with blocked IDs, stateless children who grew up to become young activists in the field. Some of our very first clients now hold citizenship. Nothing compares to seeing that dignity restored. I am grateful to Lizo, Anjali, Lusungu, and all the amazing people who kept fighting for those early clients over the years. And a message to the team, you are not alone. You're part of a global battle against statelessness. Celebrate each win, even the small ones, because there will always be more work to be done. You are making an indescribable difference. And our dearest Lizo, who joined in 2012, says working in the Statelessness Unit was one of the most cherished experiences of my life. It changed everything I thought I knew. Sitting with clients in their most vulnerable moments was tough, but a privilege. And many said simply being witnessed in their pain was what they valued most. This work taught me patience, and it showed me the power of women around me. Anjali, with the brilliance on exemptions. Jessica, who helped me dream and endure the lonely moments. Cindy, with her deep knowledge of the immigration system. And Karabo, who has been a mentor since the early days. I also want to acknowledge the clients who never gave up, the mothers who fought for their children, the candidate attorneys and interns who passed through the unit, all women carrying heavy burdens. And finally, Thandeka, that's me, who took the baton from me and brought to life the unfinished work in ways I could never have imagined. And to the team, lean on the women around you. We are here to support and advise and comfort. Between us, we have everything we need. From Lusungu, who worked with Liesel in 2012, she says the stories that stayed with her most are those of single mothers and their children fighting generational statelessness. Their strength and resilience remain with me. Mpo and her children, who sadly remain undocumented. Pindile, who finally received her ID just in time for her daughter to write her matric exams. Queen and her daughter, who would sit in my office for hours, strategizing and sometimes crying in frustration when we hit brick walls. And Leonie, who endured severe trauma, but bravely confronted her daughter's abusive father to ensure her daughter obtained her birth certificate. To the team, this work demands not only commitment and professionalism, but also passion, compassion, and a thick skin. I'm so proud of all the women who have shaped the Statelessness Unit, and I stand in support of those who continue to shine the torch. Viva LHR, viva. Trish said the LHR Statelessness Unit provided the opportunity for me to learn many important lessons about how people deprived of nationality are truly legal ghosts, without access to the most basic rights tied to their dignity and humanity. My work with stateless people inspired me to complete an LLM on the subject, focusing on the impact on African children and on funding methods for birth registration initiatives, some of which I later published through Oxford University Press. I will always be grateful and inspired for the lessons I learned from the passion of the lawyers working to eradicate statelessness at LHR. A luta continua, Kanis. And Sharon, who says the Statelessness Unit's brilliance lies in showing the indignity of being without documents and then acting on it. The highlight of the work of the Statelessness team is to demonstrate the greater indignity suffered by Black women of Africa. The work has highlighted the particular indignities suffered by Black African women, shaped by race, class, and gender discrimination. Her document, Her Dignity, makes visible how much society loses when women are stripped of their humanity, their dreams, and their hopes simply because they lack a document. And she had a message for everyone. We appeal to your humanity in this call to join us in taking this work forward to ensure that we do not tread on the dreams and hopes of the younger generations of Black African women, as we all struggle to transform the society we live in and ensure redress in the context of enduring legacies of racial discrimination and economic inequality. And Checo, who joined the team in 2019, said that the Statelessness Unit felt different from the refugee clinic where she initially began her articles. First, it felt as though there were more files, less hands, and that's still the case today. Second, the statelessness clients had less community. They were isolated. The unit shaped me profoundly. It was here that I first learned to apply intersectionality, a tool that continues to shape how I interpret the law today. And to the team, she says, without community, the work becomes impossible. But I hope this work also changes you for the better, like it did for me. It is also my hope that it helps you also find or have found your people, your community, like I did. And Notando, what impacted me most in the statelessness unit was the supportive environment. I was allowed to make mistakes, to learn, and to grow in confidence. That kind of healthy environment is rare and powerful because we cannot truly assist others if we ourselves are unsure, unsupported, or weighed down. 3 cases in particular still stand out for me. The Koza case. I was overjoyed when he finally obtained his identity document. The Khanyapa case. I will always remember the victory of knowing that he was able to secure documents for his children. And to Mr. Mokotedi, who sadly passed away before we could get his ID, she says, I still feel a sense of regret that we were not able to assist Ubaba Mokotedi. Yet over time, I've come to accept that while we cannot win every battle, our commitment and compassion are never wasted. And to the team, keep up the incredible work. Every person you help carries a story that may change their life forever. In moments of doubt, return to the reason you started this journey and let it guide you forward. And above all, protect the culture of kindness and support. It makes the unit not just a workplace, but a place of hope. And from Andile Msane, working in the statelessness unit remains the highlight of my career. I assisted over 100 clients with citizenship applications, from making phone calls to soften officials, to sending countless unanswered emails, even memorizing clan names to build rapport. And she says, I now know that the clan name for Dlamini is Sibalukulu, because I once had to praise the head of citizenship on the phone just to get applications processed. How is that as an alternative to litigation? And she says, every effort was rooted in purpose. What I'm most proud of is having worked alongside a team that genuinely cares, recognizing that this work is not a tick box exercise, but a human rights imperative. While the outcomes of this work are never about personal recognition, they serve as a powerful reminder to stay the course, to continue advocating for justice, and to never lose sight of the human dignity at the heart of our mission. And specifically to the team, she says the work within the unit was and continues to be profoundly powerful. The work you do matters. The people who benefit from your efforts matter. And every interaction with them is a chance to restore dignity and affirm humanity. Obstacles will come, but creative problem solving, empathy, and persistence, and knowing clan names clearly will see you through. You are part of a legacy of impact. Carry it forward with courage, compassion, and conviction. Once part of the stateless unit, always part of the statelessness unit. Now, not everyone managed to send a message, but I've created a roll call for all these wonderful women who have pioneered the work around ending statelessness in South Africa. I myself have transitioned out of my role as the head of the statelessness unit as of May, but my heart remains with the work and remains with this team. And I'm confident that our clients are in good hands because you're women of conviction and women of great courage. I would say, like everyone else mentioned, that community is always the fluid or the missing piece. And I really hope from today, we've built a sense of community that we can all lean on. Now I'd invite everyone to give the women of the statelessness unit a virtual round of applause, a standing ovation by sharing a purple heart in the chat box. This brings us to the end of our conversation, dearest friends. But I also cannot end without thanking Bella, Primrose, Paula, Raquel, and Maggie for sharing their stories through the Her Document, Her Dignity campaign. I would also like to thank Abigail Charlotte, and Madeline, who brought the creative vision to life and walked alongside the women to capture their stories. And lastly, I'd really love to say thank you to our audience for joining us today, and we hope to really stay connected. We will share the links again, maybe through the mail list, and we'll be in touch. And please do also continue sharing our global giving campaign so that we can revive our fundraising around DNA tests. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you.